Hello and welcome to the Many Savage Worlds podcast, an RPG podcast where we're going to talk about setting and world creation for the Savage Worlds role-playing game system. Today we're going to be talking about horror specifically. We started a new month, so we started a new setting. I'm joined today by Nathan Carmen and Bobby. Can't think of your last name, Bobby. I'm sorry.
Evans,
we've only done this like 10 times.
To be fair, everything online I go by as DM Bobby, so it's.
But you know, hey, that's how you know that we just record this live. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to the guys coming on and helping me out. Check them out. We got Nathan's putting out some great third-party stuff for Savage Worlds, Tricky Troll games. He's available on the online distributors, RPG Now and Drive Through RPG. And Bobby, as he said, DM Bobby, GM Bobby, GM's Table specifically. You're going to find him on all social media, YouTube, great YouTube channel. He's now available on iTunes, recent for him, and big step for him. So come out and support him. He has really, really great content, Savage Worlds, some OSR stuff.
Actually, I should say thanks to a patron, as of last week, you can actually go to thegmtable.com. And it'll actually take you to like my old blogger, which will link you back to the iTunes stuff.
That's awesome.
I mean, I'm still making the site nicer than a blogger, but at least I have the domain.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really cool. So like I said, tonight we're going to be talking about horror. Horror in Savage Worlds. Well, it's not my most comfortable topic, but part of what we're doing on this show is we're talking about how Savage Worlds can do it all with a little ingenuity and imagination. So we're going to talk about horror. And I think that Savage Worlds is really cut out to do a horror game. We've seen some really great examples from not only Pinnacle Publishing, but some third-party publishing. And, you know, everything from ETU, Realms of Cthulhu. There's the other Cthulhu. Deadlands. Yeah.
The originator.
That's true. That's true. And it really is a lot more horror than Western. And I think people kind of just say, oh, it's a Western, but it's so much horror. I mean, it has an entire fear system built into it. It's really cool. But for our horror setting, we talked a little bit before the show. And we talked about doing a sort of like a paranormal investigator type horror.
Guy Fieri's cooking shit.
Yeah, so it was going to be like those shows you see on like A&E and the History Channel. You know, they go out and investigate these haunted places. But we decided, what if it was like Guy Fieri's Haunted Kitchens? He takes the ghost of Flavortown. We're not endorsed by Guy Fieri or the Food Network.
So good you'll die.
I lost where I was going with that. That's too good. So I think the first thing to talk about with horror is how to make Savage Worlds feel like horror, because it's so far from horror in its basic vision. You know, it really does pulp and action and adventure really well, but horror is really this sort of totally different thing. So I'd like to hear what you guys think. How do you bring horror over into a game that it's not to say you can't die in Savage Worlds, but it's such big action. It's so easy to pull off these crazy big things and live through, you know, people fall, you know, 100 stories and live through it because they soak it, and, you know, car explosions and plane crashes. And so how do you make it feel horrifying?
Well, feeling horror, in all honesty, if you go on like the Savage Worlds forums and stuff, you'll see this drop all the time. The great Woolcock will tell you this. Don't give out more bennies. It goes against a lot of Savage Worlds, but the power curve of this system is how many bennies you give out. Now, be upfront with it right away. Like, this is a horror game. If you want it to be scary, go, here's your bennies. You're not getting more.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely... I was having that same thought as we were coming up closer to the show. That you start out with a certain amount, and you just can't earn more through the role playing. And I think that's kind of, I don't want to say crappy, because part of role playing is that you know what you're getting into. So I think, like you said, Bobby, you have to be upfront about it because some players are going to say, "Well, I'm role playing and I deserve bennies." But if you just sit down and tell them, "Listen, we're trying to capture a tone. We need
Yeah.
it to feel a certain kind of way."
The thing is this is something you're going to come across if you're running horror in general. Most tabletop gaming is about power fantasy for a lot of people.
Right.
And a lot of the people that want to be rewarded for role playing want to get things and earn and have power for what they do. Horror is the antithesis of that. Horror functions because of the loss of power, the feeling of the loss of agency. It's supposed to be a struggle, it's supposed to be scary. First of all, you got to understand not everyone you come to with this is going to want this game.
Right.
But the kind of people that are like, well, but I need to get my bennies, might not be the best fit for a horror game. You got to go in with the mindset of you are playing weak, probably damaged people who are going to have a tough time. The enjoyment of a horror game is getting through against the odds, not finding ways to stack the odds.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I think that's absolutely true. And you're right. Player selection is probably the most important part because you're going to find a lot of people who aren't going to be into it, or they're going to try to run it a whole different way. They're going to try to run it like D&D. Well, I'm going to run in and stab it. And it's like, well, no, you're not.
This genre has probably the highest buy-in of any genre for it to work. Because horror, when we were originally talking, we we're like, well, what kind of horror do we want to do? Because in a lot of ways, while horror is a genre, and the easiest way for us to do horror is to do modern horror.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't say horror without another genre. Horror is a mood and an atmosphere that can go on anything. So if you don't have players that are willing to buy into that mood, it will not be horror.
Right.
Horror can turn into a farce like that. Trust me, my ETU game is a farce, but I knew it going into it, my current one.
Yeah, there's another show, and I think it's the GM hangout with Jared Gunning. They talk about Cthulhu turns into Scooby-Doo on the drop of a dime if you're not careful. And that's very true. And I don't think that should deter people from trying, because it can be fun to have like a silly slapstick. I've talked about it a lot on air. I run really silly games. They're not very serious. I don't enjoy that kind of feel. I like something more laid back and fun and a lot of jokes. And, you know, like John, who's not here tonight, he is great for that really tongue-in-cheek sort of PC where he's always like blasting 80s metal. And, you know, he named his pilot Sammy Hagar.
How many PCs is he going to make that smoke cigars? Like,
yeah, you know, he wants to secretly include a Beretta with every PC, one way or another, and like that's okay with me because I think that's really fun, and that's kind of the school of role playing that I came up through, was that it should be like silly and lighthearted. I didn't grow up with an older crowd. Me and all my friends that were the same like teenage boys all learned to play together, and we had teenage boy mentality, and but not to get too off topic. But you know, horror doesn't have to be so serious. It can it can be fun.
Right.
now,
We're talking about serious horror. Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Oh, sorry. Just the thing about horror, and this is from a writing standpoint. Sorry, this is where the, you know, my degree comes in and all that crap. But horror is about build up and release.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good horror has humor in it. There is a reason Freddy Krueger is actually one of the most memorable slasher villains of all time. It needs it there. You need the release. It's about the high wire act of balancing the two.
Yeah. No, it's true. The cat that jumps out instead of the killer. And everyone jumps, but it's funny because you just jumped at a cat. Or, you know, the creepy shadow in the corner that's actually... I mean, it could be anything, but it's a prop instead of the actual terrifying thing.
One of the mistakes that I made when I was running a horror game for a group was revealing what was going on wrong way too early. Way too early. And then once they understood that, it was just like, okay, then we got to go find out the problem. And it started to feel more like D&D after that. They were going to go slay the alien creature or whatever. And then I was like, crap. Like, immediately, I was just like,
yeah. Well, like once we get into like the three types of horror, which I was talking to you about earlier, Nate, that's the existential side of horror. When people hear existential horror, they think Lovecraft, but it's the unknown as well. not knowing will always be scarier than anything you write.
Right.
Mystery and horror are like blood cousins.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason that Lovecraft was such a pioneer for horror is that, I mean, he was writing at a time where they didn't have images to put to these things he was thinking of. And
Yeah.
I mean, he could have written up descriptions, but they wouldn't have been as good as him just breezing past these, you know, unknown, unseen horrors that really made it what it was. And I mean, when we talk about different kinds of horrors, you know, that obviously led into like the slasher horror, which, you see the enemy and it's all based on like this, what's often described as murder porn. People just want to see the blood and the guts and the killing.
Is that
Which has a
contaminant gore?
And honestly, that's my preferred style. I love slasher films, and I think
It's
they're really
the
fun.
easiest one to translate.
Mm.
The tabletop by
That-
far. I mean, the horror companion has a slasher killer in it.
Yeah, I've never read the Horror Companion, which is weird because I am a big horror fan, but not in horror gaming. I like horror media. I like horror movies, but not so much in gaming. I think slasher would be really hard to do in Savage Worlds.
Not. Oh, sorry.
But for the reason that I want to talk about next when it comes to our setting. But go ahead. What were you gonna say? It's not as bad as it seems.
Not as hard at all for two big rules. The first rule is if you're doing a slasher game, you want gritty damage. Sorry, I drew a blank.
Oh yeah.
Gritty damage changes the game for Savage Worlds. We've talked about it, but it completely changes the game because one wound makes all the difference. Second of all, always remember NPCs don't follow the rules of PCs. The slasher and the horror companion is a perfect example. He is immune to everything except his weakness, and the players don't know what that is. He is unkillable. Another good example is actually the Wild Hunt, the test drive, because he's killable, but he always comes back. The thing about a slasher is they are always moving, and you never know when they strike, and they're unkillable. You can do that in Savage Worlds because you're allowed to.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's not like, and I think one of the great things about Savage Worlds, even though there are characters and monsters and beasts and that you can reference in these setting books, it's not like D&D where if you say, okay, you're facing a beholder, everybody knows what it is and everybody knows its weaknesses and its stats and what spells it has and every power it has because it's uniform and anybody who runs it the same way. In Savage Worlds, even the players expect these little variants that make everything feel unique. And they don't complain as much. You know, you could say you face a vampire, and then if that vampire doesn't match core vampire, your players aren't going to be as surprised as they would with other games.
Savage Worlds is a game that front and center goes, there is no raw.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because by there not being a raw, there can't be an expectation of raw.
Right. Yeah, I think that's great. But so here's what I wanted to talk about, and I started to think about it when I started thinking about slasher films, as PCs in a horror game. My concern with PCs in a horror game, and it may not be a founded concern because, like I said, I've never played horror in Savage Worlds. I've played some horror in other settings. I worry about the starting level of PCs. Although starting level isn't notoriously strong, it's pretty accomplished in Savage Worlds. A starting PC can do a lot, especially with the correct build.
They can.
I wonder, do you guys feel like starting PCs at novice would be too powerful for a horror game? Let's talk about specifically a paranormal horror game. Well, I guess before we talk about that, now that I think about it, we have to talk about what is the paranormal? Like, what is paranormal horror? Because I'm saying, well, they could be too powerful if it's investigating, but it could not be too powerful if they're facing these like really powerful, like you talked about the immunities, invulnerable ghosts.
Yeah. The thing is, and this comes from years of ETU and stuff, and granted, when you're running a long campaign, once they figure out an enemy, it does completely change the game.
Mm-hmm.
But like, Ghost in ETU, and I'll probably be referencing ETU. In all honesty, that's the new horror companion until they rewrite the companion, because the horror companion's so old. ETU is kind of the modern horror companion. Ghosts don't die. If you hit them enough, they disappear and come back later. And you have to hit them with magic or salt. And if you don't give them magic, they got to figure out the salt and figure out how to hit them with the salt to just keep them away for a little while. The only way to get rid of a ghost is to figure out what its problem is and do the story. Things like that. I was actually going to say, again, I know I'm the one that's run a lot of horror here, but ETU does have a good rule where they say nothing should start above a D8 unless you have good reason. I like that rule, but it's also not necessary because Savage Worlds is this self-regulating machine of you want to be great at something, fine, you're going to suck everywhere else.
Right.
Personally, I actually think the D8 rule is to keep players from getting themselves killed. Because the thing about horror is you're going to stack the deck against them. Penalties hurt a lot in Savage Worlds. You're going to be stacking penalties on them a lot of the time in a horror game. Realistically, there should be very few, just 4. One of the great things about horror is it's always dark. Read the lighting section first and foremost, because even that low light's going to be giving you a -2.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's something that people would really overlook is that, and we always talk about a play, maybe not we specifically, but the Savage Worlds GM community always talk about make sure you apply your modifiers when people say it's too easy to succeed, but it's not. It comes up in ranged combat a lot, I think is the one that people see more than anything else. Yeah. But like you said, and lighting is huge.
I'm gonna throw your 2 biggest modifiers in my experience with horror. I said lighting, rushing. Put them against hard clocks of things like something's coming to get them. Cool. You want to pick that door open? There's something rushing at you. You got to do it in half the time. That's an extra -2. Time constraints help build the tension, and tension is everything in horror.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. The other thing, what I think about that too is don't overuse it because it only has so much value, but don't be afraid to use a dramatic task.
Oh yeah,
and a dramatic task is already at a -2, and if you want it to feel tense, -2 stacked with other penalties, and your players are trying to get those 5 successes by the 5th round, limit the Benny economy so they know if they burn them all, they're all out for the rest of the session. If this happens early on or even halfway through, it's going to scare your players.
Yeah.
Running out of bennies early is it creates a lot of tension. It's a bad feeling to know that especially if you know no more are coming, or you are even in a regular game, you're afraid that you're not going to get enough.
Simply saying Joker's Wild isn't on the table means they know there is no lucky card that's going to save them with a Benny. You just removed a level of hope, which is a big part of horror.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've never played ETU, but I kind of like what you were saying about the everything starts at a D8.
Yeah.
Not at a D8,
attributes can go as high as you want. In ETU, they have a rule: no skill goes above a D8 unless you have a very good narrative reason, and the GM okays it.
Right, and I know it's it follows college. So a lot of people play college athletes who may have certain skills that are higher because of
honestly, ETU is a higher power curve than standard Savage Worlds.
Yeah,
break it down because you have your extracurriculars. And the biggest penalty is usually academics, which is, I don't want to say it's worthless, but it's the superfluous thing at every advance where you roll your academics to see how well you did. If you have a power gamer, they will not care about that, and then in-game figure out as many ways to get bonuses to academics to make up for it. But, you can go athlete and take your bonus to strength, and now you get +2 to all strength checks, including melee damage. ETU is not a low-power game. It's action first, horror second, comedy third.
Yeah. So with that said, we would want to be controlling the power curve on our end. So I think Bobby brought up a good point, whether or not the D8 limit actually creates or hinders the power curve. So if we were creating PCs for a horror game, would we limit what they're allowed to start with? Would you let the person say, especially if you don't really tell your players what they're getting into? I mean, you tell them, listen, there's going to be no Benny economy or almost no Benny economy, and it's horror, and and it's gritty damage and critical failures and all the things that make it dangerous. But do you tell them what they're up against? Maybe you tell them the setting. Hey, we're going to play paranormal investigators. But you're going to have a player who says, oh, well, I'm going to take a fighting D10 because, if it's a horror game, I don't want to die. So I'm going to try to fight off the big bad. And then you have, I'm going to take my vigor at a D8 or a D10 because I want to be able to, survive when it finally comes down to taking damage. But if people aren't careful, they'll neglect the thing. You might not tell them, but you might have it focused on investigation. It might be knowledge skills will be the most advantageous thing to have in this situation. Now, if you don't tell them, them trying to power game will really just be shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
But if you limit it to a D8, they're going to spread those skills around much, much more than they would. And now it's more likely that they're going to be qualified to do the things they'll need to do to succeed.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I definitely think.
Oh, sorry, Nathan. No, you go, man. I've been running my mouth.
I was going to say, I definitely think horror, more than most genres, really requires expectations to be out on the table front and center. And we were kind of talking about that earlier, too, but you definitely really need to make sure everyone is on the same page. And also kind of going back to what you're saying, Bobby, if you take away, it's great because the GM can start setting the mood early. If you're taking away something like Joker's Wild and they don't have that hope there, boom, you're establishing your setting and your mood from the get-go. Like, hey, stripping of your hope right now. And I think in general, when you're looking at horror as a whole, at least my limited experience running it, I didn't establish things well enough early on. And one session I ran, it took about a good 15 minutes before my players realized, oh, this is like a B horror movie. Okay, so this is ridiculously cheesy and over the top. And then once that clicked, we all had a great time. But definitely, I think, especially people like me, like with my limited experience, I mostly think of slashers when I think of horror. So I don't really have my favorite horror movie would be Alien, and that's like really about the limit of my knowledge. So going at it from that angle, like if you have a player that is interested, but like me doesn't know much besides that, and that's not what you're running, it's definitely gonna screw up some things pretty early on.
Well, like I said earlier, horror has the most important buy-in probably of any genre. Something GMs need to remember is setting expectations is crucial to that buy-in.
Yeah.
And horror, again, we're just doing a rewind. Horror can lay on top of so many other things. So you need to know. Horror actually doesn't describe much other than kind of saying we're playing on hard mode.
Right.
Now, as far as players screwing themselves, I would probably say, look, you want to diversify. I wouldn't force them. But especially that player who thinks, I'm going to go Vigor because that's how you stay alive in Savage World. They just died because high Vigor will raise your toughness, but odds are horror, you're not going to have armor. So that 1 or 2 points of toughness isn't going to matter much. The only other 2 things Vigor is for is soak rolls and that incapacitation roll. And if you limited bennies to 3 unless they took luck, best chance they're getting is 3 soak rolls the whole game.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're going to think, I can just soak the damage. They didn't think about the Benny economy.
Yeah. You're probably better off, doing high spirit for fear resistance, plus I think from there you can take harder to kill. I think that's spirit linked.
Yep.
So you're probably better off just doing that.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that you're probably going to kill your players without using physical damage. You're probably going to use fear. maybe not even kill them, but you'll incapacitate them in narrative ways. You're too shaken to your core from failing.
Well, sorry, Ben.
You'll be using other tools to, if that's what you're looking to do, to take them out of the narrative. Depending on your goal as a GM, you may want to kill them. Again, we're not talking about slasher for us in particular, but it keeps coming up because even though there are several kinds of horror, I feel like the ones you're going to find most often are going to be, well, I shouldn't say that. Oh, I like slasher, so it's hard for me not to talk about slasher films, and then your character's going to die. We're talking about paranormal investigators. You're talking about the supernatural. There'll be some unseen horror. You may see it. You're going to hopefully face it. It'll be the ghost sort of thing. That won't be physical damage. It could be. You could do things like Poltergeist, where you get hit with flying chairs and different things, or maybe the ghost materializes and you're having a physical confrontation, and there may be a physical fight. But then, of course, you have like the existential horror, and that's really about just not losing your mind.
Sorry, Dan.
Before I'll let you say what you had to say, but talking about existential, and I think it applies to all genres of horror, is how do you handle things like fear and sanity? I know there are some people out there that do it well, and you could just go rip it right out of what they're doing. But if we're talking about core, which doesn't handle it super well,
that's what I was about to get into.
Perfect.
I was actually going to say, for short-term games, and I'm talking like up to 5 sessions, maybe even up to 10. The fear rules in the book are actually fine. For anyone who doesn't, my ETU games have run up to 80 sessions. I run very long form. But it also gives an advantage. And now, when you're running that long form, first of all, it's really hard to keep the horror going at that level. So you're not going to see that much. But the thing about the fear rules, and the reason why it starts to break down, is your players start stacking phobias left and right. However, that's also not always a bad thing. You just have to be really careful, because the thing is with the fear rules is the phobia has to be based off what caused the fear check. And sometimes I've literally had weakened enough characters where a slammed door has caused a failed fear check, which has caused a phobia. You got to think of like how this phobia works. But look at phobia. You want to talk about stacking penalties? Phobias is how it happens. Really bad. Really, the horror companion has sanity rules, and sanity rules are actually really good. But if you actually take the time and think about the phobias you can add so they don't sound ridiculous, like you're terrified of closed doors or whatever, having a character end up with a fear of the dark is debilitating.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I've never run the fear rules because it hasn't applied to anything that I've ever done. But Bobby, who has a lot more experience, I'm definitely going to take your word that it is a sufficient short-term goal solution.
Yeah, I've made long-term ones that I call the Zoinks rules, because they're slightly more like Scooby-Doo, where things build. Just because they're... And this is actually, it's a really easy fix where things like, if something you already have a minor phobia of causes a minor phobia, just make it a major. Fear rules don't do that. But again, Savage Worlds kind of expects GMs to be big boys and girls and kind of fix that sometimes.
But I don't want to do any work.
Yeah. I play Savage Worlds because I want to be lazy, and you know what? You're not wrong.
Yeah, I think that could be tough with so some of the rules we're talking about with the fear. I think it could be tough in a one-shot or mini campaign. Well, in a mini campaign it'd be good. I think it'd be tough in a one-shot. Maybe not necessarily impossible, but in 2 to 3 hours, they may not be failing very many fear checks to be developing these.
They will. The thing is don't throw things that cause just a fear roll. Things should have fear levels on them. Have something with a fear 4. Because what that's going to do is they have to make a spirit check at -4. And if they fail, I roll that D20 fear table +4. A 21 and up is a heart attack.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I actually had a player where we were like, we're going to do the dramatic interludes rules in ETU. And he rolled like an encounter between sessions. I was like, you know what? You were in the woods one day near campus and ghouls attacked you. And it's a basic fear check, but he was badly wounded. It was like a fear -1 for ghouls, but he'd had wounds from the last adventure. He got a heart attack in the interlude. It happens.
I'm not playing in your horror games, Bobby. You're too mean.
we ruled that since he was a college student in perfectly good health, we ruled that it was a minor issue and had to be hospitalized. Because it wasn't even like an actual adventure. It was a table roll. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah, no,
that's actually the incident that made me write the Zoinks rules, where I was like, I need long form horror rules.
So while we're talking about ways to horribly maim your players, because when you talk about horror, you have to talk about that classic Gygaxian. You know, we're here to kill the players. For once, we actually get to say that, and it's acceptable that we've come here to kill them all. Or maybe one. You have to leave one survivor, right? That's kind of the trope in horror, is that one person gets away to tell the tale, or to come back in the sequel.
Then the enemy comes out of the grave and kills them at the very end. Like mid credits, you're good.
Setting rules. I kind of said something about them earlier, but I think the best way to go. I mean, you have to use gritty damage because you need to get the penalties going. You need to, take the power away from the player.
Do not forget the one-armed penalty. How bad the one-armed penalty is, because it gets overlooked a lot. Think about what they actually need 2 arms to do, and throw that, I think, -6, because it's gonna ruin their day.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to say, well, yeah, you could do it with 1 arm, but you're not as something like driving.
Yeah,
you can drive with 1 arm, but maybe give them half a penalty.
Yeah,
improvise.
Yeah, feel free to do that. If it's a all right, cool, you get half a penalty, -3, have fun.
Yeah, you can drive with 1 arm. Good luck turning on your directional and adjusting different things. And don't use your directional. Somebody hits you because they think you're going straight to that intersection. Another one I think is really important is critical failure. Well, I'm torn because if we limit the Benny economy,
you don't need it.
Not allowing them to re-roll. Maybe you want them to re-roll. You want them to use up those bennies as quick as possible. I
actually would leave it off because, again, one of those things people overlook is Snake Eyes is bad news no matter what rules you're using.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. In Black, I hope they rewrite this because Snake Eyes is a critical failure. And the critical failure rule is no re-rolls of critical failures. Right. And that gets very confused for people. They're like, well, but we're not using that rule. And Snake Eyes is still bad, dude.
Yeah.
So I think I'm with you, Dan. If you leave the rule off, it's actually a bigger temptation to burn their very limited resource.
Yeah.
I think so, too, because they'll be so eager to not suffer the awful thing that's bound to happen, especially in horror, where that awful thing could be really cataclysmic.
Plus, they'll think you're being nice when you aren't.
That's true. Yeah. So you know what? Maybe I was originally gonna say, gotta have critical failure because you want to limit their ability to succeed in a way. But I think the temptation might actually be more advantageous. And it might be fun to watch the players actually sweat a little bit. Should I do it? Should I not do it?
Right. Yeah, it plays into the unknown too, because then what awful thing is that GM going to come up with? I could be looking at having the 1-arm hindrance now, for all I know.
And honestly, this is when we talk about the cat jumps out and stuff, the GM can have something just embarrassing but not deadly happen on a critical failure and do that tension release and kind of reward them for not spending the Benny, which really screws with their heads.
Yeah, so that's a tough narrative to control. I don't know if I'd be qualified to run a game like that, but you're right. You have that tension release, and it's huge, and it's such a moment at the table. Like I said, I don't know if I'd be able to capture it just right.
It's hard.
Yeah, I think it's... I've heard a lot of people comment that Noir is one of the hardest to run investigative games, but I think horror has to be either the hardest or a close second.
Side tangent, with Deadlands Noir's easy to run because they have such great tools for building investigations.
Oh yeah.
It makes it a breeze. It was the first Savage Worlds I ran was Noir, and it was easy.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure yet, but I've only heard good things. I've heard they really hit the nail right on the head. But yeah, you have to be careful to capture the tone. I mean, with horror, it's about tone more than rules. I mean, it doesn't matter what game you run, what rules you run. I mean, sure, there's some that will help you. We've kind of talked about the things that will help you make it successful. But if you can't capture the tone, your game's not going to be all that it could be. Don't let that deter you. If you want to try and your players want to try, do it. I've played in a lot of games that fell flat, whether they were fantasy or modern day. I played a lot of Cyberpunk, and some of those games just were not that good. But, it didn't make me hate the GM, didn't make me hate the game. So don't be afraid to run horror, even if you think maybe it's not your cup of tea. But if your players want it or you really want to try, go for it. And just, it's like role-playing. Don't be afraid to fail.
Well, the thing is, as I've been saying, horror is the inverse of what we expect most of gaming. There's not going to be a lot of rules because horror is about what you don't offer, not what you do. So it's more about what aren't we going to bring in. Like, personally, I would honestly say, first of all, I think there's the given, no arcane backgrounds. Not an option.
Yeah.
Standard. But here's the other one. You don't get your starting money.
I was just thinking the same thing, Bobby.
No gear.
Stole my
what do I have? We're going to discuss what your character would have. And no, you don't get to explain why you have a knife. You want a knife, you better find it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you tell me who your character is, and I'll tell you what gear they have on them at the moment that my game starts.
Again, loss of agency.
Yep. I think that's, you have to take that away from them because it's natural for gamers to want to, it's like you said, it's the power fantasy.
Yeah.
You take that away from them. You take away the power.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's, it sounds a lot like bullying players, but it's about buy-in. And we spoke about that earlier. Your players are bought into this. They know what they're getting. And if they have a problem with it, they didn't actually buy in, and you need to have a conversation with them about, listen, I'm not doing this to be mean to you. I'm doing this to capture the right game. I think you're absolutely right.
Here's the main thing, especially like if we go to our Guy Fieri cooking show. The players go, well, what gear do I get? Like, I have my $500. What am I going to buy? Why would the cameraman have a gun? Well, I have a licensed cameraman. No. You know where your $500 went? To the camera. That thing's expensive. You're done.
Right.
And yes, that does kind of sound like bullying, but again, this is where we got to have that fine line of give me a really good reason and we'll talk about it. Like, well I need to strip wires for quick repairs. Cool, you can have a small pocket knife. And there are those concessions. But let's see how well a small pocket knife is actually going to do you.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think people that have a problem with that, like, well, you shouldn't make me buy my camera because it's part of my character. We do that with other games too. When we play, we're talking about modern day, and that's the genre that I'm most comfortable with. When we play modern day, we don't just give every PC a car. Every PC should have a car.
Speaking of ETU being a higher level than people think, you start automatically with all your school supplies, a computer or laptop, a smartphone, and a car.
Huh. I mean,
every player.
Maybe we do give players cars, but I never would if I was playing.
Yeah, well, it's not fair comparing it because I want to say this right here. I love ETU. ETU is my favorite setting. It is action horror.
Right.
It's not pure horror. We're talking about pure horror right now, so the rules are going to be a little different. It's going to be a little harsher.
But even if you want to talk about, say you're playing medieval fantasy, most people, like, you're adventurers. I mean, sure, you're novice level adventurers, but wouldn't you have a horse and cart? Wouldn't you have armor and weapons? And well, no, you wouldn't.
The knight get his armor for free,
but not for free. Exactly, and I think that's what you need to kind of capture with this. Well, the cameraman shouldn't buy the camera. Well, no, he should, and like he has it. He can use it. I don't know what you're going to use it for, but sure, that's part of your tool set.
And if they get really, really upset about that, go, fine. You can have $500 in your pocket when we start in the abandoned hospital.
You can make it rain on the ghost.
Like, what would your character be carrying? And let's not try and like work around it. He wouldn't. And again, that's that whole buy-in. Just let's be honest here.
And when plus, your player pitches something terrible, tell them no. Because players, they're going to push it as far as they can to get that thing that they think is. I mean, if they really are adamant, I'm a big person. Like I always say, like if they want to cheat, let them cheat because that's how they have fun playing the game. And like if that's what they feel like they need in their life, I'm not one to stop them. If you have a player that says, "Well, no, I need a gun. I need to have the gun. I have to have the gun." Fine, give them the gun.
Yeah,
they go through the ghost and they shoot one of their teammates.
I was actually just about to say that exact same thing. I'm like, if they really want to push it, it's just like the DH. You're actually helping them in a way. What's funny is the things where it sounds like we're being nice, like, oh, we're not doing critical failures. It's screwing with you. The things that sound like we're being mean, it's helping you because the first thing that Ghost is going to do, if you're playing it well, is going to either be the kind that possesses a person, and they'll possess the guy with a gun, or they'll create an illusion or make it think like you have to shoot something that they not accidentally put themselves between you and your friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they'll do. They will take what you think is power and use it against you because it's horror.
Right. And I think that's really an important part of horror is as a GM, try to spot those things and try to make the power moves your players make backfire. And if they do the small struggles, the things that they, let them succeed on the little things and take away the big things. It's going to help that hopelessness really come alive.
When things are incredibly dire, the small victories will feel a lot bigger.
Mm-hmm.
On paper, it's going to sound like, man, I'm screwing with them, but it's going to be memorable. And they're going to feel huge. And if you don't want a game where everyone dies at the end, because that's fine, not every horror, then they get one big success. It's called the finale, and they earn it. Because horror is about it being earned. In a very real way, a big reason a lot of people play horror is they want to earn their victory.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So we haven't talked much about mechanics. We talked a little bit about mechanics. We're talking a lot about feel, which is the most important when it comes to horror. So I think we're on the right path when talking about horror. But we talked a little bit about, so we said no arcane backgrounds. I think that's very, for PCs at least. Your Ghost could have arcane powers, sure.
Oh, yeah.
They should all have Puppet. Good luck.
Have fun with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about setting rules. Gear, take away the gear. And have a good session 0. If it's a one-shot, build the characters. And that's the nice thing about a one-shot, if you're going to do that, is most of the time you're handing out PCs that already have gear anyways.
I was going to say, if it's a one-shot, pre-make your characters.
Yeah.
Have pre-mates. And if you need pre-mates, get the ETU pre-mates, because they're not broken, and it's before they get access to magic or any of that stuff. And just, scratch off the cars, if you really care about it.
I'll give them cars. I mean, they're not going to need them anyways. So, let's see. What are we missing? What are we skipping over? Let me think real quick.
It's really a minimalist genre.
It is. One thing we didn't talk about, and this is going to depend on your game more than anything else, we didn't talk about monsters, villains, adversaries, NPCs. Excuse me. Depending on what game you want to run, and if we talk about our game specifically, a paranormal investigation, Ghost Kitchen with Guy Fieri, Fry Guieri, to avoid being sued by the wealthy estate of Guy Fieri. You run Ghosts. I may be mistaken. I probably should know this. Is there a Ghost in Core?
I got Core. I'll check.
Yeah, there is.
There is, right? I thought so, but I wasn't positive because I've never needed one.
I'm gonna double check the Ghost. Ethereal ghosts are immaterial and can only be harmed by magical attacks, and they don't get magic.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that's what we talked about earlier. You said, in ETU they have the salt option. You could eliminate that. You can make so the ghosts are not able to be killed. in this setting. It can't be done. You will not kill a ghost no matter how hard you try. You have to solve the problem.
Yeah. And speaking of those fear penalties, they're a fear -2.
Yeah.
If seeing a ghost is spirit check at a -2.
As it should be. That's terrifying.
Yeah. Like I said, you're gonna fail. You're gonna have people fail fear checks.
Yeah. And don't treat it. I think it's normal. I have a Call of Cthulhu book, and I've talked about it a little bit here and there on the show. They talk about getting used to the horrible. At least in Call of Cthulhu, you see so much horrible stuff. So, in this game, we're a group of paranormal investigators who go around to haunted places. When they see a real ghost for the first time, they're not used to it. These TV shows are, your players are, your PCs are essentially paid actors who pretend to find ghosts. They find spooky places that don't have lights and weird shadows.
In a one-shot, the mention of becoming jaded won't happen.
Yeah.
A campaign would be hard to run.
I wish the jaded rules were a little better. In a campaign, honestly, the thin blue line has the best answer for it.
Yeah.
It's an edge.
Oh, yeah.
It's an edge you can take once per rank. And what it is you say, select one enemy type you have already encountered. You no longer make fear rolls against it. However, unique versions or incredibly different variants may still cause a fear roll.
That's interesting.
I actually love it because it means, especially for kind of I run horror, but I run action horror, honestly, mostly. Most of my horror knowledge is writing. But if you want to make like a vampire hunter character in like a higher stakes game, they can invest the edge and then go, well, no, vampires don't scare me.
Right.
When they see a ghost, they still freak out.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to approach it if you're going to do a campaign.
Yeah.
That could be really good. I think this would be a tough campaign. At least the setting we're talking about specifically.
The setting we're talking about is built for a one-shot.
Yeah. And my mind kind of is geared towards one-shots most of the time anyways. Most of the other settings we've talked about could be campaigns. They've all had like really good campaign potential.
Honestly, if we took the Guy Fieri aspect out of it and just made it an actual Ghost Hunter show, it does work as a campaign. In all honesty. If you made a legit Ghost Hunter show, it works.
It does, I guess. I just thinking about. I think I'm drawing too many comparisons from the real world that like Ghost Hunters are just a bunch of frauds, anyways.
Well, no. What you do is you go into tropes, and all of a sudden it turns out they're part of like an ancient prophecy. Have an old gypsy woman kick off a campaign.
You know what? It could be a good campaign, and it would be like. It wouldn't be a set of individual adventures. It would be like this rapidly downhill spiraling like plot point, like just right out of control. Yeah. But it could be really good. You're right.
You could do an episodic campaign because this was an old show. I don't think it got more than one season. But look up the show Freaky Links. It starred Ethan Embry. And it was a show like right when the internet was becoming a big thing about these people that ran a paranormal website that then went and investigated things people posted onto the site.
Oh, the internet was fun back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know. But it was solid. It was trying to be a like X-Files for the Gen X.
Right.
But it had a good premise. And honestly, that's all you need. Because all you really need is like a good sleazy producer. It's like that had the best ratings ever, and he starts sending you to more and more dangerous places.
Right. Yeah.
And now you guys don't want to go, but you're in a contract.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
It's something you could do that would be fun with if you were doing episodic and you didn't want to have it just be this one. Very long. Sort of broken up narrative. Don't be afraid to have your players go into someplace and not find a ghost. It's all just this tension and release and release and release, and then eventually they just, they're there for 24 hours, or they're overnight, and then the next morning comes and, the producer calls them up and chews them out for not making it scary enough and move on to the next one.
Right.
It can be a really fun approach to take to it.
Honestly, it takes narrative chops and being able to set the tone, but you can run a successful horror game in something like an abandoned asylum that is nothing but scares and fake outs, and nothing was there, and you can make it terrifying.
Yeah,
It's hard. It's one of the hardest things to do, but it's doable.
Yeah, it definitely takes a certain kind of GM. But if you're that kind of GM, you know, go for it because it can make some of the most memorable games, I think, in my opinion. They stand out so much from the crowd because you don't see them as much. You don't see as many games running these kinds of things. I mean, when you look at published settings, not just Pinnacle, but third party. I mean, there's too many to count.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the ones that you see getting mentioned a lot, there's tons of fantasy. There's a really good amount of sci-fi coming out. Pulp isn't super supported, but that's because Pulp is just so easy. You don't really need setting books for it, but there's a good amount of Pulp stuff. Less than the
Pulp adventures, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need whole setting books because Pulp is it's just self-defining. But you don't see so many horror games. I mean, with the exception, I shouldn't say that because there are some, but they're all sort of these cross-genre. Like
Yes.
Deadlands is a Western with horror undertones. And ETU is horror, but like you said, there's so much action involved. It's hard to really call it. I guess it's not hard to call it horror, but there's a lot going on there as well.
Yeah, 12 to Midnight, which is the series that became ETU, is actually closer to horror. It's not a setting. ETU's like their setting book they finally came out with, but they're like long form adventures.
Yeah.
I'm talking like I've run adventures that have taken like 8 sessions.
Wow.
From them. But
yeah, I've read a little
they're really well done. And they're closer to real horror. There's still some punchy action because it's Savage Worlds. But,
right. Well, I think that's what it comes down to. Like you just said, there's still punchy action because it is Savage Worlds after all. It's going to be hard to eliminate all that punchy action. I mean, let your players try. Let them fail, though, because if you're really trying to capture that horror feel, just have their most badass attempts be unsuccessful and just show them that it brings a little more of that doom around. And I've never played it, and I almost picked it up kind of recently, and I'm still hoping to at some point. Realms of Cthulhu.
Nice.
I imagine that there's parts of that where you sure try to kill it. Yep, nope. You just unloaded you hit it in the face with a shotgun blast from a foot away, and nothing happened. Like I said, I haven't read it yet, but I'm familiar with Cthulhu. I'm sure there's so much hopelessness that it just drips horror. And if you're talking about horror and Savage Worlds, I think that would probably be the published setting to go to for strictly horrifying horror.
Yeah, you're pure existential horror.
If you want really fun, really a lot of support, and a really well written game, ETU. I've heard nothing about good things, and obviously Bobby is a huge supporter.
New book's supposed to be coming out soon too.
And if you want to hear what ETU is all about, not that we're here to pitch other stuff, but I mean we're here to support Savage Worlds. Bobby, the GM table, he has some ETU stuff up on the channel, and I haven't got a chance. I listened to. I don't think you ran it under Savage Worlds. I think you did it with Basic Fantasy, the that throwback 80s high school adventure.
Oh yeah, that's actually it's not Basic Fantasy. That's a totally different one. It's called Dark Places and Demigorgons.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which they took the old Mulvey D&D rules and remade it into 80s slasher / Stranger Things. Now it's a little crazier than that because when you get to higher levels, the metalhead can summon demons. Oh, it has a good layer of humor on it, which is just glorious. But now, before I forget, one thing I did want to bring up, especially for the GMs out there, don't forget about your mundane threats, especially if you're doing ghost stories. Like if we're in the abandoned hotel, weak floorboards, falling into pits, rusted nails, these small things that can drag the players down.
Yeah, have them fail an agility check and fall down a flight of stairs because they're running from a threat. That's a really good point. We didn't mention it, and I think for some people they think of it naturally, but a lot of people would overlook it, and it's easy to
Hazards.
overlook. It's
Look
easy
at
to overlook
hazards.
that when you're trying to use bumps and bruises.
Oh yeah.
When you don't have bennies, you're not going to be soaking as much, but you can't soak bumps and bruises.
I was just about to say. Honestly,
So-
I'm a big anyone who goes Savage Worlds is too easy. Bumps and bruises, you can't soak that shit.
Yeah.
Just
Yep. And
Nope.
that's we've been talking about it a lot. You want to stack the penalties. You want to make it hard. You want by the end of the adventure, that finale we talked about where they're all either going to make it out alive or they're not. Let them roll at -8. Yeah, sure, they're going to die, but that's the finale. That's that big final blowout scene where the ghost drags them all back into the asylum and the door slams shut and the lights go out, and that's where the session ends. And everyone's going to be like, "Wow, that was epically awesome."
we know we're running a tough as nails horror game. Is this the kind of horror movie that ends with everybody driving away from the zombie hordes in the bus miraculously because you guys did amazing and prepped? Is it the lone survivor who had 2 fatigue and 3 wounds by the end but got 1 lucky roll? Or is it the cut to black who's coming in on the sequel?
Yeah, I think that's right. And figure that out beforehand what you want to do, but it may change.
I was gonna say the dice can completely change it, but it's okay to remember all of those are horror.
Yep.
And as long as you set the expectation, like any of these can happen, just it becomes much more okay. You definitely have to be okay with killing your players. You got to be willing to remember all your penalties, stack your deck, and just get creative with it. And reward creative thinking from your players.
But not
like
with
you
bennies.
said. What was that?
But not with bennies. Don't give them any bennies.
No, not with bennies. Honestly, reward them with reducing penalties.
Yep.
If you're already stacking a bunch of penalties, don't go, "Oh, that was a great." Be like, "Oh, okay, well then you bypass that penalty, but you still have these." That's what you want to do because you want them to have to think their way around it.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, it's going to be heavy role play. There'll be some dice, but they won't be as helpful as they might think.
If you're doing your job right, your players should be terrified if they need dice. Does dice mean they can fail?
Yeah, that's very true. I think we've pretty much covered most of the bases. We kind of breezed over. We talked about the ghost and the core. There's some really good features you can give the enemies. We mentioned it a few times. Invulnerable. Use invulnerabilities. Immaterial, where they can't be harmed. They're on this sort of immaterial plane. If you're doing ghosts,
Right.
but we're talking about ghosts because that's what we're doing.
Well, we could run down some of the classics. Jason can only be drowned. Freddy, you have to pull him into the real world to hurt him.
Yeah.
Chucky, wood chippers.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of like some good like ghosts. And I'm kind of drawing a blank because it's not my forte, like in like classic media film. But
Ghost stories is such a broad genre.
yeah,
But they tend to share the same. Again, you can't physically touch them, but they can screw with you.
but that's the big thing, is that you're not going to be able to hit it. Like sure, shoot it, hit it with a shovel, but that's not the way you're gonna defeat these problems. You're not gonna have the big bruiser come in, the tank, and one shot your big bad. That's something you don't have to worry about in horror if you're setting it up the right way.
Yeah.
And if you do allow it to happen, you overlook something you shouldn't have. Because these enemies should be invulnerable until you want them to be vulnerable. If you want there to be a situation where they can kill them, have it be, if you're in a hospital or the asylum, maybe when they step aside the chapel, they become materialized and they can be hurt. Or maybe they start, if you can keep them trapped in the chapel long enough, it diminishes their power. Set these things up beforehand. Like the Wild Hunt, we talked about that. That's actually a really good horror, base adventure. And it's if you can live through the night, and that's the thing though. Like, yeah, you're not going to kill him. but you can live through the night. And there's something else too. I've never played it, but I've read it. You can find his remains, right? I mean, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't played it yet. Sorry, guys. But you can you meet somebody throughout the adventure, and they tell you how the backstory, and then you can find the remains and dig them up or lay them to rest or something. And it, that's not so. There are ways to defeat them, and it's set in stone before you even start. But it's not just run up and shoot them, run up and stab them.
Make the rules and stick to the rules. But the rules aren't easy. Now, also, speaking of Wild Hunt, because I was going to bring up, do you remember, you can make enemies that your players can physically fight and physically beat, but they come back. In the Wild Hunt, you can beat him in a fight. He just comes back in an hour. And if they can just come back, they're effectively immortal. It's the same difference. But it gives them the feeling as if they won. And what's actually really great about that is that first fight, if they don't know, they're like, yeah, we won. And then, okay, now how do we get back? Wait, he's back? Yeah, you just drove him away. He's going to keep coming.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. And I don't know if we're going to run our session in an asylum, but that seems to be one that we're referencing. When you talk about ghost hunters, you always think about,
somewhere abandoned and derelict.
Right, and where the people that were there were all horrible, awful, tortured souls. But if you're in an asylum, there could be these thousands of manifest ghosts roaming around, and some of them maybe cross over, and so you're fighting off these things on a regular basis. And sure, they're not very tough; they're extras, and you could have them fight a wild. You could do the Wild Hunt. That's a wild card that you fight over and over again.
Yeah. Who summons extras?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a hell of an adventure, I will say. But have them fight a bunch of extras, or they could even be mundane threats. Like we talked about. Don't forget about creaky holes in floors and falling downstairs and the rusty nails. There could be, if you're in an abandoned building that is in need of repair, like derelict building, there could be wild animals that have wandered in.
I was actually just thinking, throw a wolf in there.
Confronted by a pack of wild dogs, coyotes, wolves, anything on that nature. You could be hired to investigate something in a place you're not supposed to be. So there could be non-evil threat. You could be bypassing security. So now you have the police or security guards looking for you as you're stalking around this place because you're trespassing. You didn't pull permits to go in and film this. There's a lot of different things you could do.
Right.
Create the enemy besides just because I think it's important to not just have an enemy you can't fight the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to feel like it fell a little flat. If it's
you need the minor victories.
You do. And with role players, not just Savage Worlds, but any role players, they want those minor victories to involve combat sometimes.
Right.
I've ran no combat sessions, and they can be really fun, but it's really hit or miss. And usually when it is no combat, you didn't plan on it, you just never got to it, or your players went around it intentionally. So
those investigative moments can be those investigative victories can be just as powerful though too. When you finally discover the weakness of the big bad that you haven't been able to take out, that can be just as potent of a victory.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting into tropes and stuff. When you're talking about the big bad with the weakness, it's really a two-phase front. Half your adventure is we're fighting something we can't beat. Run.
Right.
Once you find the weakness, now it's we have to get to this thing before he gets to us. And then it's a race. And then you have the weakness, and then the tides turn. And then you feel the victory. So you have the minor victory of finding the weakness and the major victory of using the weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I think that definitely can't argue with that on that. And that's just funny because I had put together a horror one shot that I never played. I was gonna run it at a online con. The date of the con started on Friday the 13th. So I was gonna do a horror inspired game, and I had to cancel just because of my availability before it all came together. But I had kind of followed a very similar formula, and I'm kind of glad that I hit the nail on the head. I guess I'm not as bad at horror as I thought I was. But yeah, it's at some point it should feel like it turned around for them. Maybe not entirely, but it should feel a little bit of that power coming back. leading up to that
You give
final
them a
moment.
glint of hope. You give them tastes of hope so they don't starve.
Yeah. Right. Well, we're a little bit past 9, and unfortunately, I have somewhere else I have to be. So we're gonna wrap this up. But to kind of sum up what we're going over here, the rules are important, but the rules aren't as important as setting a tone, capturing the feeling, figuring out what you want that feeling to be, and a lot of player buy-in. Right? I think that pretty much.
Definitely. That sums up horror, like the needs for horror.
Yeah. Yeah. And Savage Worlds can do it with a little help. So with that said, I didn't plug anything on the way in. Well, I plugged our host, but I didn't plug the podcast. So if you made it this far, come check us out. You can listen to us on YouTube and iTunes. You listen to us on one of them right now if you're hearing the show. But make sure you like, follow, subscribe, share, depending on which platform you're on. But help us spread the word if you like the show. Tell your friends, tell the players in your group, tell your GM, tell your grandma. I bet your grandmas love the show. You can follow us on Facebook and G+. I'm a little more active on the Facebook, but you'll get the updates on G+ if you prefer that platform. Absolutely. You can email us, the Many Savage Worlds Podcast at gmail.com. You'll find us on everything else at the Many Savage Worlds Podcast as well. But all the information is in the description below. So stop by, check us out, let us know what you think, drop a comment, leave a rating. We're happy to hear from you. Let's see. Other than that, there's one last thing I want to plug. Coming up on July 28th. It's 3 weeks from the recording. It's going to be a little bit less by the time this actually gets put up on iTunes and released publicly on YouTube. They do them both the same day now. I'm going to be running a one-shot based on our previous setting, the sci-fi setting. I have the event on the Facebook page. You guys want to stop by, the host as well, but also the listeners. You guys want to stop by and check it out. If you're available, come on out, play a one-shot with us. It's going to be on Roll20 using the sci-fi, the Space Truckers setting, as I dubbed it. I don't have a lot of details yet about what the adventure is going to be, but it's going to be awesome. I'm thinking we're going to go like super 80s, like trucker, but in space, because that's really fun.
Time for Jan McCoy, because
yeah. So if anybody
McCoy needs to.
If the host can make it, I would be happy to have you guys come out and play with me. But any listeners that want to join in too, new players, old players, don't know the rules that well, super familiar with the rules. It's on Roll20. It's super easy. If you do come play with us, hopefully some of my other hosts will be joining me. You'll be surrounded by really qualified people that don't mind helping you as long as you have a great time and really just love role playing. I guess with that said, we'll see everybody in 2 weeks for our actual play episode for horror with the Guy Fieri's Haunted Kitchens. All right, thanks for listening.